Let me ask you this question. In Sahih al-Bukhari, there is a clear forgery in Sahih al-Bukhari number 7. Okay? Basically, do you know Sahih al-Bukhari 7?
These are many, so you can mention, just bring out what you know.
I'll cut to the chase. Yeah. And I've got it, we can look at it if you want me to.
Okay.
Right? Sahih al-Bukhari number 7 tells a story about Abu Sufyan meeting Heraclius. And Heraclius does a big interview with Abu Sufyan. And then a letter from the Prophet comes. And Heraclius reads the letter. He's the Roman emperor, by the way. He reads the letter and he decides that this is a true prophet based on the interview and the letter. He also has a dream. And he writes to his friend in Rome and he says, he inquires of his friend in Rome, and his friend replies to him. And he goes to Homs. He leaves Abu Sufyan. He goes to Homs and he reads his friend's reply. And his friend's reply tells him that Muhammad is a prophet.
Muhammad is a prophet.
That's what the Hadith says. Okay. And then Heraclius gathers all the elites of the Roman Empire together and has a meeting in which he says to these elites of Rome, I think we should all become Muslim if we want our empire to survive. Okay. Right? Now, here's my question to you. Which member of the Isnad chain had access to that private letter and I had access to that private meeting of the Roman elites?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Now, when it comes to Hadith,
yeah,
sometimes I don't want to get too much into debates of Hadith because there are specialist scholars on Hadith. So I don't want to usurp their authority. But what I know about Hadith is this. We have chains of narrations of what you are saying.
Yes.
But your question is, who have access to those letters to be able to narrate? I don't have no idea.
Right.
I have to research into it.
Right. Here's my answer. Yeah. When you look at the Isnad chain and you look into the biographies, it will become quickly apparent that none of them could have. None of them could have. Right? When you look at their hadith, when you look at the biographies of those people in the Isnad chain,
say none of them could have. What's your basis of the argument?
Right, because they're either, firstly, they're in the Hijaz with Muhammad. They're the companions of Muhammad. Right? They hear the report from Abu Sufyan. So the only person that could potentially have contact with the letter in the private meeting is Abu Sufyan. But do you honestly believe that Abu Sufyan, who was a trader and a merchant, is going to be brought into a private meeting of the Roman elites where the Roman emperor is about to suggest that the entire Roman Empire converts to Islam? It's utter forgery and lie.
Okay.
It is pure forgery and lie.
Your base of argument is that, one, there was no way one of the people in the Isnad would have access to the letter.
Or Abu
Sufyan. On the basis of that, then it means that particular hadith
is a lie and a forgery.
Okay, I have to research it before I can come to such conclusion.
Now, I can tell you're a smart guy. You're a smart guy because you asked me a tricky question and you clearly thought about it before you came and asked. Well done you. But now think this through logically. If I have established good grounds to demonstrate that in Sahih al-Bukhari there is a forgery and a lie, then that means the science of hadith have failed and that the whole collection of hadith is now in question. Because remember, for something to be Sahih, every person in the Isnad chain has to be good character so they don't lie, and they have to have precise memory and good recollection, and they have to be righteous in their deen, right?
Those are the bases we use to categorize the hadith, because we have authentic,
yes,
we have good,
and we're talking about, and this Sahih al-Bukhari number 7 is Sahih, which means it's reliable, which means it's trustworthy. But that means someone lied, and there is a lie and a forgery in Sahih al-Bukhari. So how many other lies are in Sahih al-Bukhari that Bukhari didn't spot?
I'm thinking that instead of saying lies, you might be better off saying maybe it might be error. And I'm saying this because when you look at Sahih Bukhari, it is authentic, and I believe in it.
Yeah.
It's an authentic book. Now, this Sahih Bukhari, when you look at it, at the beginning of prophethood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the isnads says that he lived in, I think, in Medina or Mecca for 13 years before he migrated. No, in Medina. In Mecca, before he migrated. 13 years before he migrated.
Migrated to where?
To Medina. He
Right.
migrated to Medina.
Yeah, which is in the Hijaz.
Yeah, and in the same Sahih Bukhari, okay, in the same Sahih Bukhari, I don't, maybe later I have to give you the evidence. It says that he lived in that place, Mecca, 10 years before he migrated. Then, have you seen the same authentic book? We have 10 years in Mecca, the other one says we have 13 years in Mecca.
Yeah.
So then we use historical sources to confirm and work out how long he stayed
Yeah.
in Mecca before he migrated. And all the historical sources we have confirms that he lived in Mecca 13 years. Now, my point is this. Authentic, Sahih Bukhari is authentic, yes, we all agree. But you can see that there are slight differences regarding how long he stayed in Mecca.
Yes, synoptic differences.
Those are not lies, those are errors which can crop. I can show you one.
No, I believe you.
You're trying to
understand what I mean.
Bro.
Content, not
Yeah,
the
no,
chain.
bro, it's all right.
No, I'm not talking
Bro,
about chain now.
bro, please,
Before he says
please,
it's corruption,
please.
I'm saying that it might be
Bro,
better off saying
bro.
errors.
Right,
than
one
corruption.
second.
Yeah.
I accept that you've got a synoptic error in the Quran.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Hadith. In the Hadith. You have them in the Quran as well, but we're not talking about that. But you've got a synoptic error in the Hadith. I accept that's an error, right?
Yeah,
So
it might
one
be
second.
an error, yeah.
1 second. But that error only comes to light because of the two different reports.
Yeah.
But that means, because you have admitted that there are errors in the Hadith, that there could be other errors in the Hadith that you can't identify as errors because you don't have a contrasting Hadith. You can only identify the error because of the synoptic difference. If you've got other errors in the Hadith that have found their way into Sahih al-Bukhari without a synoptic difference, you wouldn't be able to identify them as errors. So the question is, since errors have found their way into the Hadith tradition, how many errors are in the Hadith tradition? Secondly, this Sahih al-Bukhari 7, it is blatantly not an error. Like getting a number wrong of how many years somebody lived in such and such a place, that I can accept could be erroneous, right? I get names wrong all the time. I get dates wrong all the time. I accept people can get that stuff wrong. But you don't get wrong a protracted story in which you claim there was an interview, you claim there was a letter, you claim there was a private correspondence between an emperor and his friend in Rome and back. You claim to know the substance of the letter. You claim that there was a private meeting of the Roman elites in which the emperor claims he wants the entire empire to become Muslim. That's not an error. That's a lie. There's no way on earth that that's an error. So I am correct to call it a lie. It's a forgery.
What I'm saying is, I need to research further into it in order to confirm what you are saying. Well, I'm saying this because I've seen so many videos, people saying this is in the Quran. For example, I've seen somebody ask a question.
Yeah.
If Quran says it is confirming previous scriptures, then it means what kind of scriptures is it confirming? Question, and then they seem to misinterpret Quranic verses. I've seen it all the time. That's why I'm careful in saying that I need to take time, go and research it, and see what the correct position is.
What was your name again, sorry?
My name is Dauda.
Dawada.
Dauda, yeah.
Dawada, let me ask you this question.
Okay.
If you can see that there may be lots of errors in the Quran and lots of
The Quran, there's
sorry,
no
my
error in the
apologies.
Quran.
There's an example of an error. There's an example of an error. If you can see the possibility that there's lots of errors in the Hadith and lots of forgeries in the Hadith, and you cannot know, and you can't know which is which because they're all called Sahih, do you not understand the implications that that has for Sharia? Let me give you an example. In Sahih al-Bukhari, it talks about that there used to be a verse in the Quran at the time of the Prophet that we used to recite that said that the punishment for adultery was stoning. But we no longer find that verse in the Quran, and I fear that in the future Muslims will abandon something that Allah has commanded us to do. That's in the Hadith. There's no corresponding verse in the Quran about stoning people. You and I both know it's lashes for adultery. Yes? Right? Now, that Hadith, I argue to you, is another forgery. But the reason why it was a forgery is this. Because in the early expansion of Islam, when the Muslim Qadis had to give rulings, their instinct was to do what was being done in Medina and to follow the local custom and consensus. And in the region, the local custom and consensus was to stone adulterers. And so they invented a hadith to justify their continuation of stoning, even though the Quran never gives that command. My point to you is this: if the hadiths are full of forgeries and full of errors that you can't detect because there's no synoptic distinctions, then your Sharia is broken. Your Sharia is not from God. You can't trust the interpretation of the Quran.
Can I explain?
Go on, Dawud.
Okay. Now, basically in Islam, we have the Hadith and we have the Quran. And I'm happy you understand the Hadith and the Quran.
Yeah.
Now, the Hadith and the Quran are not on the same level of authenticity.
Agreed.
And authority.
Yes.
The Hadith is like the Quran position on the Hadith is superior. So when you are reading anything in the Hadith which contradicts the Quran, even though it is in an authentic Hadith, you have to disregard it and take the Quranic position. Am I clear?
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy you know this one. So, in the Holy Quran, there's a verse we say, Inna anzalna alayka Qur'ana tanzila. Indeed, we have reviewed the Quran progressively.
Yep.
So the Quran as it is, it didn't drop down as one single book.
Yeah, I know that.
It is sent down over a period of 23 years, step by step. Step by step. That's
Yep.
how the Quran was reviewed.
Yep.
Let me give you the example of alcohol. When the prohibition on the verse of alcohol will come, okay, the first verse which came, it told them that when you are drunk, don't get near to prayers.
Yes.
That's the first verse.
I'm aware of that.
Then after that,
Yes.
after a period of time, then the final verse came that they should stop alcohol completely.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm
so
aware of
if
that.
somebody is not aware of the way the verses are revealed,
Yes.
and you just go and stumble on when you read, don't get close to prayer, you take it, oh, it is even the Quran that when you read, you can drink alcohol.
Yep.
You understand?
Yes, I understand.
So when the Quran came, you can see that it says that let the people of the book judge by what Allah has sent down. I don't
Yes.
know. I think you know the verse.
Yes, I know that verse.
Let the people judge by. So when the Prophet Muhammad came, there were certain things that were happening. Jews were coming to him for judgments. So those were
Yep.
the times when those verses came that if you have the Torah,
Yep.
and the crime for adultery is stoning.
Yes.
So why are you coming in for judgment? You have the book.
Yes.
So there was even a hadith where the Jews came to him. They said a woman committed fornication, and they asked him to come in a judge, and he asked them to bring the book. He took the book, and he placed his hand in the book, and then he asked them, who among you is most learned? And then they pointed one man, and he called the man that use this book to judge your own people. These are the sort of things, not that they are copying, but because we don't see it as a different religion, as a continuation of the messengers of God.
Yep.
We don't see it as a different religion. So we have to continue using what we already know until Allah completes the religion. So the verses were sent over a period of time. It's not a one book. So they were not forgery.
Can I reply?
So the stoning and the whatever are no forgery.
Can I reply?
Yeah, you can reply. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You done? Okay. I just want to.
Have I made myself
Yeah, I
clear?
understand your
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
I understand. To be honest, I actually understood all that information before you said it.
Okay. Yeah.
But I wanted to let you finish because I want to have a conversation with you. But the point is, that doesn't actually deal with the hadith I just quoted to you. It's in Sahih al-Bukhari. It's talking about the fact that the Sahaba, one of the Sahaba is saying that there used to be a verse in the Quran that said that we would stone. And we recited it at the time of Muhammad. But now that verse is not in the Quran. And so I fear that in the future, the Ummah will give up something that the Apostle of Allah commanded us to do. So my point, and there is no verse in the Quran that you can find that's about stoning adulterers. Find it for me. The point that I'm making to you is this, right? And you haven't addressed it in any way.
Okay, I'll address it.
You have not addressed it in any way.
I said
But
I will. So
good,
everything is
right.
I will.
So my point to you is this. I am saying to you that that's a forgery.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm saying it's a forgery is because in early usul al-fiqh, the principle was to continue the local custom. That was what was done in Medina, and that was the first sort of, as it were, madhab, right? No madhabs.
Madhab.
The first usul al-fiqh was to just continue the traditions established in Medina, and they took that attitude elsewhere, and it developed later. But the Quran never says stoning. People started stoning and they continued to stone and they invented a hadith to justify stoning. And in the madhabs, they permit stoning for adulterers, even though it's not commanded in the Quran. And the point that I'm making to you today, this is the point you need to respond to. Since we have demonstrated between the two of us that there are errors in the hadith that you managed to identify because of synoptic differences, which means there may be other errors in the hadith that don't have synoptic differences, so you can't identify them. And I've identified a forgery in the hadith that you have not responded to prove that it is authentic. You said you needed to go away and look at it some more.
Yeah,
if it is the case that the hadith is filled with forgery and error, that influences usul al-fiqh, it influences the Sharia, and you are acting on errors. You are acting on forgeries. You're acting on lies. Your Sharia is a lie. That's the point you need to respond to.
Let me take your point in two parts. The first point is this. The question that you raised about the Islam, that because you don't believe that anyone is in the Islam had access to that letter, then it might be a forgery, isn't it? So that is one part of it.
And the private meeting.
Then the second part of it, because it's a forgery, it means that the main issue in that particular conversation was establishing that Prophet Muhammad was actually a prophet of God.
Yeah, in the hadith, yeah. They say,
that particular hadith.
In that particular hadith, it's saying that Heraclius was convinced that Muhammad was a prophet.
Yeah. But that's why I was saying that hadith and Quran are two separate things, and the Quran is authentic than the hadith. So let's say given that is even an error. It is clearly stated in the Quran that Muhammad is a prophet of God.
Right, can I respond to that? You can continue if you want to. I'm just asking permission. Can I respond to that point?
To the second one. I'm addressing the second.
Carry on then. Carry on.
That one is in two parts.
Carry on.
The question of forgery and the question of Prophet Muhammad. But the main point is that he was calling people to tell them that he was a prophet. So if he was a forgery, then it means he wasn't a prophet. That's how I understand it.
That's not what I said.
No, but basically, if it's a forgery, then the claim in the letter that they should come and convert to Islam that Prophet Muhammad is a prophet isn't accurate.
That's not the argument I made.
That was the argument you were making.
Listen.
No, by extension, that's the argument you were making.
May I reply?
Yeah, reply.
Right. To clarify the argument that I'm making, I'm not actually concerned
about
prophethood.
Okay, then let me address the other one.
I am concerned about the fact that a forged hadith that is full of lies and fiction, it is a 7th, 8th, 9th century fiction, is claiming that Heraclius wanted to become a Muslim. That is a forgery and a lie, but it is called Sahih, reliable. And that means somebody in the Isnad chain lied. And if they lied once, so Bukhari 7, I can get it up for you if you need to see it. You can find it on sunnah.com. Right? Because remember, in reply, you said, oh, but I can give you another example of an error. And you gave me an example of an error. But that error was only identified because of a synoptic difference. But that means there could be other errors in the hadith collection that have no synoptic difference, but they got in. And there could be other forgeries in the hadith that got in, and other lies that got in. And this means that your hadith collections are not reliable. And if they're not reliable, your religion collapses, because as you know, and I agree, hadith are below Quran, but you interpret the hadith, you use the hadith to construct the sunnah to interpret the Quran. So the hadith have an interpretive factor over the Quran. If the hadith can't be trusted, your interpretations of the Quran cannot be trusted. Agreed?
Okay, I understand what you mean. I'll use the same argument you are using on the Bible.
But you've got to reply to the argument as well.
Yeah, your hadith, the question of whether the stoning is a verse or verse, we have abrogation of verses. And in the same hadith you are quoting, Prophet Muhammad, actually, when they were compiling, he was the one who superimposed when they were writing the verses, when he recites and they write down the verses. There were verses that were abrogated. It's not all the abrogated verses that were included in the Quran. There were abrogated verses. Do you agree?
There were abrogated verses.
Abrogated verses.
Right. So what do you? So you're talking about the stoning verse?
Yeah, I
Right.
said it could be one of the abrogated
But,
verses.
but look at the ad hoc reasoning of your scholars, because they say that when it comes to abrogated verses, they say that there are some verses of the Quran where both the words and the ruling are abrogated. There are some verses of the Quran where the ruling is abrogated but the words remain. And there are some verses of the Quran where the words were abrogated but the ruling remains. And your argument puts the hadith that I mentioned into the third category. Now, I want to point out to you, Dawood, that is ad hoc reasoning. In other words,
No, I'm not saying it is a fact. I'm saying there are verses that were abrogated.
I'm teaching you a
So
deep.
you understand?
This-
So I have to go and read, because there are many presentations that have been made by Christians. When I go and check the Quran, it's completely different from the explanation.
Do you want me to get Sahih al-Bukhari 7 out?
Okay, bring it out.
Yeah, let's bring it out. Sahih al-Bukhari 7.
Is this the stoning verse? Do you have the reference to it?
No, I'm looking at Sahih al-Bukhari 7. I'm looking at Sahih al-Bukhari 7. Bear with me 1 second. Right. So this is sunnah.com. Hadith Sahih al-Bukhari number 7.
Okay.
Right? So let's just pull it back so you can see the bit that I'm talking about. So this bit. Heraclius remarked the sovereignty of the Arabs had appeared. Heraclius then wrote a letter to his friend in Rome, who was as good as Heraclius in knowledge. Heraclius then left for Homs, the town in Syria, and stayed there till he received a reply from his letter. That's private correspondence. And from his friend, who agreed with him in his opinion about the emergence of the prophet and the fact that he was a prophet. So that's saying that it knows the contents of a private correspondence. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2. On that, Heraclius invited all the heads of the Byzantine to assemble, the ruling elites, in his palace in Homs. When they assembled, he ordered that the doors of his palace be closed. That means it's a secret meeting. Then he came out and said, O Byzantines, if success for your desire, and if you seek right guidance and want your empire to remain, then give a pledge of allegiance to this prophet. That means they are claiming to know the content of a private meeting for the elites of Rome.
Yeah.
This is clearly a forgery. Anyone with common sense can see that. How does anyone in the Isnad chain know the contents of the letter, or the content, what was said in a private meeting amongst ruling Romans, who were at the time, the people of the Sahaba were down in the Hijaz. They were down in the Hijaz with the Prophet. That they had to be. But these events are occurring in Homs in Syria, and this is before the Battle of Yarmouk. So this is before the Arabs take over and conquer this land. So this is obviously, to a rational mind, a forgery in the Hadith. It's a lie in the Hadith.
Let me meet you on your same argument. So because you claim this is a forgery, that
It is.
sort of invalidates the whole Hadith.
Correct.
Okay. I want to use the same basis to argue on the Bible too.
I want you
Let's
to
see.
address this, but yes, we can move on.
Let's say, given that what you are saying is correct,
Right.
you want to conclude that the whole Hadith is invalidated. We can't rely on it.
So
That's
what?
the argument.
Yes, what I'm saying is you cannot know which hadiths are trustworthy and which hadiths are not trustworthy for the interpretation of the Quran, because the science of hadith has failed. This is called sahih, it's called reliable, but it's a clear forgery. And so because it's a clear forgery, a clear lie, it's made up, it's fiction, you now cannot know which hadiths are errors and which hadiths are forgeries, and so your basis for interpreting the Quran collapses. Sharia collapses. The Sunnah collapses.
Okay, I'm getting your argument. So if I was to use the same argument, then it means the Bible too cannot be relied upon.
Right, but pointing out, I am happy to talk about the Bible.
okay.
I'm not running away,
Okay.
but I want to close this argument first.
Okay,
Do you agree?
I want
Do
to
you
say
agree?
that.
Do you agree that if there are errors, if it is clearly evidenced that errors and forgeries have entered the Hadith corpus, you have no reliability upon which to interpret the Quran from the Sunnah?
No, we have reliable because we have Quran. If we read something from the Hadith and it's consistent with the Quran, we can rely on it.
The Quran is not Sunnah.
You understand?
No, the Quran is not Sunnah. You're
The
playing.
science of interpretation
No.
is the way it works. Thank you very much. This is how the science of interpretation works. Though you are quoting something from the Hadith, which to you seems to be like a forgery, if there are other things in hadith which are consistent with Quranic verses, we can use them.
Right.
We have a certain level of confidence that this is correct.
But you
So
cannot.
you can't say the whole, because of one thing you saw, the whole hadith collapses. No,
Not one, multiple. Because remember, quite by accident, you offered me an error in the hadith collection, and you explained it away, and I'm happy to go with your explanation. But the only reason why you were able to identify the error was because of a synoptic tradition. But that means in the realm of possibility that other errors could have entered into the hadith where there isn't a synoptic
to identify them,
and so you don't know what's true and what's false in the hadith.
Yeah, I get you.
So the hadith tradition collapses, the sunnah collapses.
It doesn't collapse. You can say it may collapse if we don't have something in the hadith which is not consistent with the Quran. If you have something hadith talking about something and we don't have a verse in the Quran talking about that same thing, then you can say it is collapsing. But if the hadith is talking about something and there's a verse addressing that particular thing, we can still work with the hadith.
But no, that's not how it works. One second. I'm sorry, Dawood, but I need to correct you on your deen. It isn't that you use a verse of the Quran to act alone. Every verse of the Quran is interpreted through the prism of hadith literature. If there isn't a hadith that talks about a verse, I would be amazed. Please find me that verse where there's no hadith talking about it, because when you read through the tafsir, for every verse that any tafsiri quotes, he's quoting hadith all the time. Happens for every verse. So every verse of the Quran is interpreted by hadith. If you can't trust the hadith, your understanding of the Quran collapses. Now, I'll give you an example. You have a hadith. It talks about stoning. The Rajam hadith. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
The stoning, yeah.
Right, so I'm not making it up, am I?
So the stoning, my question on the stoning.
Yeah.
Which particular verse of the Holy Quran mentions stoning?
None. That's the problem.
That's what I'm saying.
No, that's the problem.
And it is not in the Quran, then it means the weight of it is not strong. But if you have something in the hadith and there's a verse in the Quran, then it means we are based on consistency.
Right, let me help. Right.
Are you understanding?
I understand your point exactly. I understand your point exactly, but that would respectfully, this is where you're in trouble. Because when you look at the madhabs, all of the madhabs permit stoning for adultery. What is the Hanbali permit stoning for adultery? Why do the Hanbali justify stoning for adultery? Do they quote a verse of the Quran? No, they just quote the hadith. There's no verse in the Quran that talks about stoning. If it does, show me. So basically the Sharia is being lent on the hadith and not the Quran, because what's the punishment in the Quran? Whipping, lashes. And you know and I know that if a verse of the hadith if a hadith contradicts the Quran, you're supposed to dismiss the hadith, correct?
Yeah, that's
right.
how it works.
But yet the madhabs ignore the Quran and they build a Sharia, they build a Sunnah on the hadith alone. And here's how they excuse it. I'm teaching you your deen now.
No, you're not teaching me.
I'm teaching you your hadith.
I know about it.
Yeah.
What you are saying, I know all about it already.
Do you want me to read the hadith?
Which hadith is that?
This is the hadith, Sahih 1691. Verily Allah sent Muhammad with truth, and he sent down the book upon him. And the verse of stoning was included in what was sent down to him, which means your Quran is different from their Quran. We recited it, we retained it in our memory, and we understood it. Allah's messenger awarded the punishment of stoning to death. That's what you said when you talked about when the book in their hand.
Yeah.
So Allah's messenger awarded the punishment of stoning to death to the married adulterer and adulteress, and after him we also awarded the punishment of stoning. So that means it's sunnah. And then it goes on. I am afraid with the lapse of time the people may forget and say, we do not find the punishment of stoning in the book of Allah. In other words, in the time of the companions, there was one Quran that included the verse of stoning, but in their memory it was retained, but then later that verse was lost and it is not in your Quran today. So now not only do you have a problem with the Hadith, you also have the fact that the Quran has been changed and is not the Quran that was revealed by Muhammad.
No, the Quran has not been changed.
Your Hadith says that it has.
That's we are coming back to the same thing. That
Do you trust that Hadith?
that's why I have to go and read, because a lot of Hadith has been changed recently. Because the online Hadith, let me give you from a personal example.
Yeah.
I had a debate with a number of Christians.
Yeah.
They gave me so many Hadith.
Thank you.
Okay. They gave me so many Hadith. Some about, the description of paradise. I read the Hadith. When I went back to check the Hadith, I realized that some people have created a website. They pick the Islamic Hadith. I don't want to put them Christians. I will say non-Muslims. They have just created a website and they are manipulating our Hadith and using it as argument against Muslims. That's why I'm careful and saying I have to go and check who owns Sunnah.com.
A Muslim. It's a Muslim website.
What is his name?
I don't know his name, bro.
You see
Come on, bro. You're running, bro. You're running. Darwin, you're running.
You say it's a Muslim.
Darwin.
Who is the Muslim?
Darwin.
You don't know.
Could maybe one of you research who owns Sunnah.com?
Please.
Who owns Sunnah.com? Here's what I think from memory. Wait.
What is this name?
Bro. Dawud. I think Dawud. All you're doing is running.
I'm not running.
Running.
Dawud,
listen. It is Dawud.
And I'm saying who owns it.
Yes.
You said a Muslim.
I think it. I think it.
I want to research.
Dawud.
Take the information.
Dawud.
Yeah.
I think it is owned by the Qatari government.
Qatar, I'll go and research.
I think it is owned.
Not sure. You think?
No, I'm not sure. I'm not claiming to be sure.
Using it?
I'm
If
not
you
claiming.
think and you're not sure, why are you using it?
Right, because it is a website that is used commonly amongst Muslims.
I'm afraid I have to go and check.
Right.
Because you see what I'm telling you. I've debated with
talk
Christians
to me.
in the past.
Stop talking to them. Talk to me.
I've
Now,
debated with Christians in the past.
listen,
and
Dawud.
that's what they do. They
Listen,
go and
Dawud.
send me hadith.
Try to find out. Just put in who owns Sunnah.com. Right?
Yeah, I'm
now,
very much interested in that because I need to research.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's be clear.
Okay.
Right? And you can't prove that it's owned by non-Muslims. I can't prove yet that it is owned by Muslims.
That's why I want to go and research.
But the point is, if it turns out to be owned by Muslims, you're now in trouble.
Yeah, I'll be in trouble.
You are in
and
trouble.
when it turns out that it is by non-Muslims,
It's not going to work out like that. It's not going to work out like that.
I tell you to work out.
It's really not going to work like that. It's really not going to work. I love talking to you. You're fun. Right. But listen to me, Darwin. Right?
But I want to use
Has
the
anyone
same
found
argument
it?
you are using against me.
Any specific company, it's a non-profit organization.
Yeah, but who is right?
But
any
who is
specific
behind
individual,
it?
it
That's
is a
the question.
project
Who is behind
like a
that?
volunteer-based
Who is
effort
behind
focused on. Right. Just put in is Sunnah.com run
They
by
have been corrupting
Muslims.
the hadith online
Right.
and contributing
We're
to
going
Muslims.
we're checking now. We're going to try and find
Now,
out
I'll
who's
use
running.
the basis of argument against
No. We haven't finished yet. We haven't finished.
Okay.
So we've got a verse in the hadith that we've shown you from Sunnah.com that talks about the stoning verse. Right? And that stoning verse is not in your Quran. But the hadith says that it was in the Quran at the time of Muhammad. That means your hadiths are testifying to the fact that your Quran has been changed. Now,
Yeah, I'm getting your base of argument.
if bearing in mind it's Sahih, it was Sahih 1691, I think it was. If it's Sahih, then that means you've got a problem. Your choice is to assert that the Quran has been changed and the hadith are reliable, or to assert that we've identified another erroneous, fake, forged hadith in the corpus of hadith to protect the idea of a singular Quran. If you're going to reject the hadith, this hadith, if you're going to reject it, then that means we've got more forgeries in the hadith. Remember, if you can't trust the hadith literature, you have no basis to interpret the Quran. So your interpretations of the Quran collapse.
No, it's not everything in the Quran which is interpreted on the basis of hadith. It's not everything. The Quran.
No, it's the Sunnah. It's on the Sunnah.
Yeah. The Quran on its own makes sense in so many areas. So we can't use hadith and superimpose what is in the hadith on Quran. Quran is always on top of hadith. I hope you get me. Quran will always be on top of the hadith. So
what about the stoning verse?
When you see something in the hadith which contradicts the Quran, you are better off working with the Quran and leaving the hadith.
Right. So we've got a hadith that your madhabs use to justify stoning. You and I know that stoning is in Sharia. It's in the Sunnah.
Yeah, I know it. I know it.
Right.
Sharia, yeah.
So stoning is in the Sharia,
Yeah.
but there's no verse in the Quran.
Yeah, I understand all that.
So
I
why are
understand
you
all that.
stoning people?
I don't want to contest that or say the scholars are wrong. That's a question for the scholars to handle.
But Dawood, you're supposed to be a man who searches for truth.
Yeah.
And if I am demonstrating to you that the basis of your understanding of Islam is faulty, and the basis
No,
of
no, it's
Islam,
not faulty.
it clearly is, because
not faulty.
you keep telling us trust the Quran, not the Hadiths. If
I'm
the
not saying
two,
don't trust the hadith.
No,
That's not what I'm saying.
you're
I'm
saying the Quran
if
is
there's
on top.
something in Quran, yeah, Quran is on top of the hadith.
so what's
yeah.
the punishment in the Quran for adultery?
The Quran, the punishment in the Quran for adultery is caning.
Yes.
Now the same Quran.
What?
Let me come in.
Go on.
The same Quran says that
Oh, yeah, you might. I know that would be.
whatever the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives you, take it.
Yes.
And whatever he forbids you from doing,
Forbid it.
refrain from it.
Yes.
So it might well be that the scholars are interpreting this particular verse to mean that whatever they saw the Holy Prophet doing when he came is part of this part of the verse of the Holy Quran.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that is it, but I'm just saying that because it is in the Quran that
Yes.
whatever the Holy Prophet gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you from doing, refrain from it. It could as well be that in administering those punishments, the scholars then understood it to mean that that particular punishment may be part of the things they saw the Holy Prophet doing. Therefore, they can assimilate it into the number of laws in Sharia.
I understand.
That could
I
as well be
understand your
100%.
argument. I understand
Yeah.
your argument perfectly. But just consider what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're essentially saying Muhammad is a bad Muslim because there is a clear, unambiguous verse of the Quran that states that the punishment for adultery is lashes. And then you're saying that Muhammad allowed punishments other than those prescribed by Allah himself in his Quran.
No.
This
Let me
means,
clarify
wait, no.
something. Okay.
This means very clearly that if your logic is, if your argument is sound, that Muhammad took it upon himself to ignore the clear command of Allah and to give a punishment for adultery that the Quran did not give.
No. Let me explain this one. The 100 lashes you are talking about is talking about fornication. But the one thing with the Arabic language is that it uses both scenarios, adultery and fornication. So the lashes, which is the 100 one, is specifically for fornication.
What's fornication?
Okay? Well, we understand fornication to me if you are unmarried and you sleep with somebody, that is fornication. But if you are married and you sleep with somebody, that's adultery. So what they were doing, the Sharia is talking about adultery, the stoning.
Yes.
Actually talking about adultery.
Yes.
So it might as well be that the scholars are understanding the verse in the Holy Quran, the 100 lashes, to be specifically for fornication. And because the verse says that, there's a verse which says that whatever the Prophet gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you from doing, refrain from it. That one will be interpreted as being the one for adultery, because that one they saw him doing it. People are married, they went and slept with other people and said, no, this is adultery. The person must be stoned to death. So that could be interpreted within the context of that verse which says, whatever he gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids you, refrain from it. He's not like superimposing his teaching on the other verse. The other verse is specifically for fornication.
Good usul.
I'm dodging all the
Yeah, dodgy. Right. Great usul. Some might call it a hustle, right? But you've still got the problem, therefore, that we have a hadith in the hadith corpus that talks about the Quran having a verse that it no longer has.
Yeah, I understand that one. Have
Right?
to research into
So
it,
do you
yeah.
believe that there was a verse of stoning in the Quran at one time and now no longer is? Or do you believe that the hadith is a forgery and an
I
error?
think you showed me the best. That's why I said I have to go and reset the website. Because
Right.
People have been forging websites.
Has anyone
I have
found
to go and
who
research it.
owns or
It's
runs?
a private company registered in the UK. There's no government.
Right.
Joel Chowdhury.
Many.
What?
Joel Chowdhury.
Joel Chowdhury.
J-E-W-E-L.
Right, so we now
E-W-E-L.
Chowdhury. Joel, wait. You asked us to identify the owner of
Yeah,
Sunnah.com.
yeah.
The owner is Joel Chowdhury.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a Muslim name or a Christian name?
I can't say. I have to
Come
go
on,
and read
bro.
about him.
Come
I
on.
have to go and
Who's
read about
heard of
him, please.
Anjem Chowdhury? Jawal Chowdhury,
The person can
Anjum
even be-
Chowdhury. Tell me,
Person
tell
can
me.
even be Sheikh
Tell me,
Abdullah, something. I
Tammy,
still have to read about
Tammy, tell
to
me,
identify
tell
his
me.
knowledge in the religion.
Jawal, is it an Islamic name?
No, I can't say it's an Islamic
It is an
name.
Islamic name.
Why? What's
It
your
is an
basis for
Islamic
affirming
name.
that it's an
Can
Islamic
someone
name?
just Google is Jawal an
Yeah,
Islamic
that's
name?
what I'm doing now.
Yeah, right.
Because are you aware?
Bro,
Arabs
you're
have those
running.
names who don't.
You're running. We've
No, no, no.
provided the evidence you asked for, and you
I'll
now
read
you're
about
saying
him.
right. But the point I don't want you to get away with, and this is where I'm going to stop and let you start talking about the Bible. The point that I'm making to you is this, right? I presented the hadith about Hercules,
Yeah, I understand
right?
all that.
You presented the synoptic error, right? Which means that there are other errors that might not be synoptic. Then I showed you the hadith about the missing verse in the Quran.
Yeah. So 2 points. Yeah.
These examples draw into question the integrity of the hadith. It
Okay,
means that your Sahih, your
I
science
understand
hadith
you.
has failed,
Yeah.
and if the Sahih hadith has failed, then that means you have no basis to interpret the Quran, because when tasfir are created about every verse of the Quran, they always quote hadith. And so without the hadith, you have no sound basis of interpretation of the Quran, and Sharia collapses. That's the argument. You didn't reply, you just said you needed to go away and read more. Now, you can reverse the argument and make your argument.